Hello, I'm Catherine Bolus, and on behalf of the Tuck Food and Ag Club and the Center for Private Equity and Venture Capital, I'd like to welcome you and thank you for joining Dr. Travis Frey's presentation on innovating for our future. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce our speaker. Travis Frey brings extensive knowledge in plant biology and biotechnology to Calyxt as its Chief Technology Officer. In this role, Dr. Frey is responsible for the research and development team that is propelling product development by leveraging and developing cutting-edge proprietary breeding technologies to continually advance Calyst's innovation pipeline. Dr. Frey obtained his PhD in plant biology and biotechnology program at the University of Delaware and DuPont Pioneer, and an MBA from the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. Prior to joining Calyxt, Dr. Frey was responsible for developing and championing scientific and technology endeavors for several large multinational agriculture and biotech companies, as well as startups focused on developing organic fertilizers for food waste. I'd like to hand it over to him, and please use the Q&A, the question function, as he'll be addressing questions throughout the presentation.
Sure. Thanks, Catherine. Very honored and pleased to be here and sharing Calyst's story with all of you. I'm going to share just a few slides. I'll run through kind of who we are and some of the cool technology we use in sort of developing some of the products that we've delivered. And then obviously I want it to be pretty interactive. So if you all have questions, pop them into the Q&A and I'll answer those as I go along or try to take time at the end. So what I'll share first is Calyxt is a company that was really spun out of a startup in the University of Minnesota. And Dan Boytas was an early innovator in the gene editing space, and specifically he developed a technology called Talon. And that Talon technology is what was spun out and eventually was used specifically in our hands with plants. And then in 2017, as a company, we became public. As part of being public, I get to share these fun little forward-looking statements, which basically says don't trade stock based on what you're going to hear today. But it's one of those things I got to share as a public company. The company has been around, as I said, since about 2010. We received our first regulated or what we call non-regulated status for our commercial product in high oleic soybean in 2015. And that allowed us to, for the first time, put a plant that had been gene edited into the field. The USDA and FDA classify gene editing as a non-GM or what we call a non-regulated genetically modified system. So it allows us to bring these products to market because they're not GM regulated. In 2017, we IPO'd, and then in 2019, we launched that first product onto the market as a high oleic soybean oil. And we advanced in just about about 6 months ago, we sort of advanced to our next sort of go-to-market strategy where we're focusing on bringing additional traits, which I'll get into in just a little bit. As I described earlier, Talon, which technically this is what it's described as is a transcription activator-like effector. And what that basically means is it has the ability to go into the DNA, identify a gene that exists within the DNA already, and then actually make a small cut, which the plant's natural DNA repair mechanisms will repair. And in very small frequencies, you'll get what they call an edit or a change. And this happens naturally all throughout the genome. The difference with Talon is we're able to precisely go in and induce that to occur, and then we're able to select for it. Normally, you'd have to use markers and breeding over sometimes hundreds of years to be able to find that one change in a gene that gives you the effect you're looking for. But with the gene editing technology we have, it allows us to do that much, much quicker. And that allows us then to bring those interesting ideas like a high oleic soybean to market. And what really is valuable about that is you can think about the traditional high oleic, which is a heart-healthy oil. Oleic acid is good for your heart. And there's also some other attributes that, if you think about olive oil, which has similar types of health effects, the challenge with a lot of the high oleic oil sources like canola or olive is they are typically less sustainable in terms of their production. They either come from trees, or in the case of canola, from a plant that actually different from soybean. Soybean actually produces its own nitrogen. So the amount of nitrogen that actually gets applied to the field, and when you think about the amount of carbon that it takes to put that nitrogen onto a field, in the case of soybean, where it creates its own nitrogen by interacting with bacteria in the soil and then synthesizing that from the environment, you basically reduce the carbon footprint tremendously. And then the fact that you've got millions of acres of soybeans grown in the US, you obviously then reduce the amount of transportation it takes to get those oils moved around versus bringing them in from foreign countries or via ship or rail. So the technology and Talon in general, the way it works, as I described earlier, there's there's actually two major components. The dotted lines that you see in blue are what we call tails, and they're connected to these scissor-like mechanisms. And when they identify a specific location marked by this little circle in the DNA, they're able to attach. And then once they come together, those two pieces come together, they create that cut. And when that cut is created, you're able to remove that piece of DNA out of the DNA, and then that creates the edit that you're looking for. And we typically call these knockout edits. But this is where, in the case of the high oleic, we were able to knock out an enzyme that normally would convert the high oleic or the oleic acid into a less healthy oil fraction. And those fatty acids traditionally would create an oil that's not as healthy for you. It tends not to be as clean. But because we're able to remove that enzyme's function, now the oleic acid stays in high quantities, and you get all the benefits of that high oleic acid, and the fatty acid composition is much more amenable to a healthier diet. The Talon itself, the reason why we use it is because it's very precise. And you may have heard between Talon and Crispr, Talon was the first real gene editing technology that came on that was extremely precise and efficient. In our hands, it's extremely cost effective. And because we have the primary use of it in plants, we're the only company allowed to actually commercialize products with Talon. It gives us a really clear path to bringing these products to market. We like it in contrast to other editing technologies, partly because we have the ability to use it, but also because in our hands, the precision that we get and being able to pretty much target any gene in the genome that we want. And we're able to even work in really complex species where there might actually be multiple genomes that we're having to target specifically genes on, say like wheat, where we have 3 different genomes, and each genome contributes a different attribute to, say, bread quality. We're able to target genes specifically on any one of those genomes and enhance the bread or baking quality of wheat, for example. So the interesting part about this technology and what we're developing at Calyxt is it can be applied to a lot of different areas. And we've got partners and projects spanning across a number of these different areas. And the really exciting thing about even what everyone's been talking about today is all the areas that are in need when you think about regenerative agriculture, advanced therapeutics, even thinking about building materials, plant-based packaging, and then some of the plant-based proteins, which has been a big topic of conversation earlier this morning. gene editing allows us to really go in and think about how to take what's inherently in the plant's genome and enhance it to benefit the consumer the way they want it. So whether it be a healthier nutritional profile or taste, enhancing the taste of a plant-based protein, all of these types of attributes that typically or traditionally have been very difficult to breed through traditional methods is now at our fingertips of being able to change in a much, much faster and efficient way. The way we typically do that with partners is we'll work together to figure out, first and foremost, how do we, we'll ideate together to figure out what molecules or what attributes of the ingredients or foods they're looking for. We identify then how to deliver those traits and in what formats. And then traditionally the partners will bring it to market in their germplasm or in their product lines. The first product, as I mentioned earlier, was our Calyxt Oil, and this was a high oleic oil. It was the first successfully launched gene-edited food product in the U.S. It was the first one to achieve, we used to achieve proof of concept that we could actually use gene editing to, as I said, knock these enzymes out to keep the oleic acid content very high. We went through both USDA and FDA consultation, which was voluntary, just to make sure they were satisfied with the safety of the product. And then we had a broad adoption among a number of food service and food manufacturing companies because of the value of that oil. One of the biggest attributes, obviously, is the health profile of the oil, but it also, because of the low linolenic aspect of it, you could actually get a lot of fry life out of it. When you think about a lot of food service industries that use oils for frying, one of the challenges is that if you use an oil that isn't stable, you end up having to throw it away soon after starting to use it because it takes on off flavors and it'll eventually start to deteriorate very quickly. Our oil was actually able to last 3 weeks longer than most, or 3 times longer than most of the other oils out on the market. And what that allowed the food manufacturers to do is actually be more sustainable. They weren't having to throw out oil as frequently. And then the best part of it was for their customers, they were producing their products in an oil which was staying in the fryer. It wasn't absorbing into the material or the product that they were frying in. So they were leaving oil in the fryer. It wasn't getting carried in, so it wasn't creating any, oily touch or texture. It wasn't creating that sort of really heavy oil taste that would a lot of times come along with frying in these types of oils. So it was a big game changer for us in terms of bringing a new product to market. It was highly sustainable from just the fact it was grown in soybeans, and then being able to be domestically grown was really, really exciting. And soon after we got this on the market, there were some competitors. And as you can imagine, when you're out competing in the market with a GM, the biggest competitor against us was a GMO that also created a high oleic, but they were a lower linolenic provider. So they were classified as a high oleic, low linolenic, or HOLL. So we decided to go back into the lab and, based on the learnings we had from that, recreate with gene editing the high oleic, but then create a lower linolenic soybean, and we were able to do that. We actually just announced this actually last week, and the really interesting part of this is that this oil now has what we believe to be the lowest linolenic content on the market. It's ultra low, which means you basically super stable. You don't have any taste, so whatever you cook with it, whatever you add it to, it doesn't interfere with the flavor or the taste of the product. So this was just, in a very short period of time, a product that we developed to sort of create the next generation of our high oleic soybean that we'll be bringing out to the market here in the next couple of years. The other thing that we started to foray into was hemp. Hemp is a crop that for a long, long time has, especially in the US, has not been something folks can work with due to the legal ramifications. And because of that, there's been such a challenge with getting hemp to grow well in the field because it is very unstable from a genomic point of view. It's a lot more wild than it is domesticated. When you think about hemp, a lot of times we refer to hemp as corn 100+ years ago in terms of how it looks and how it performs in the field, because it's very wild. And so part of what we've been doing here is working to develop techniques and technologies that we can apply to stabilize hemp in a much faster framework. So taking that 100 years of corn tools and knowledge that were used to domesticate that crop over the last 100 years and do it in the next few years with the technologies that we're developing here at Calyxt. And so we just recently announced the ability to be able to transform or engineer that hemp genome, which opens up the opportunity to think about delivering traits through gene editing and advanced plant breeding, as well as for GM for those who want to use it for that need. Hoping that it will accelerate and establish it as a modern and stable crop. And when you think about hemp as a sustainability platform, there is a ton of value that hemp brings from a sustainability point of view in terms of its protein, which is extremely valuable from a food perspective. Many of the oils and the terpenes that are inherent in the crop are extremely valuable, not just for human health and wellness, but also can be used in cosmetics and a number of other advanced materials. And then obviously the fiber, which is extremely valuable in terms of not only sustainably grown, but can be extremely valuable in terms of the quality components of it. So we believe there's a big industry sort of waiting for this crop to be domesticated. And so we want to be able to apply this technology to it. So the last thing really at the end of the day that I want to leave you with is that, we really believe in the power and the possibility of plants, and we're trying to bring that power and innovativeness that plants can bring to customers and partners who really want to innovate and create more sustainable products. So we're looking to help companies, meet their sustainability goals, and then help consumers get the products that they're demanding in terms of plant-based alternatives. So with that, I will take any questions. I'll stop sharing here. All right.
Yeah, we have a couple of questions submitted through the chat. So from Elizabeth, I imagine consumers may be hesitant to adopt gene-edited foods and other products. How can Calyxt overcome these concerns? To what extent are you working with regulators to create new certifications and win consumer trust?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this is something that, when we brought Calyxt to the market, we were really interested to see how consumers adopted it. And one of the biggest areas we saw growth in was in the local markets, being able to buy an oil that was locally grown, locally sourced, and then able to be served in those similar restaurants in that area that oil was grown, or the seeds were grown for that oil. So it appeared that most consumers were desiring the ability to eat more sustainably, and when they had that story and understood that these products were being brought as an alternative to GMO, this was an alternative that then they had to choose from, which was really driving the consumer demand. Obviously, I think as we progress these products that we're trying to bring to market, I think it's bringing products that consumers can see the benefit from. In the case of the high oleic, from the health perspective, or in the case of hemp, thinking about how we bring a more stable hemp crop so that more consumer products can be derived out of it. I think traditionally, a lot of the innovations that were brought through the GM technology were not as visible to the consumers. It was harder for them to see how that value really, what that brought to them versus a grower's perspective. So we're trying to focus our consumer-facing, certainly our products on consumer-facing needs, so they can see where that benefits really can be had.
Yeah, sort of building off of that, there's a question from Jillian. How do you plan to help? How do you plan to market your product and help consumers overcome some of the misconceptions?
I think a lot of what we've done is obviously having these types of forums to be able to talk about the technology and what it is and what it isn't. The fact that we're not adding any foreign DNA, it's inherent. We're using the plant's inherent systems, the DNA, the proteins, the enzymes, all the things that the plants naturally do. We're just basically being able to use what's there. And just doing it more precisely than what can be done with the more traditional plant breeding methods. So you can do it a little bit faster and then know exactly what you're changing versus making random changes that are harder to track and pull out. So forums like this are really important. And then obviously just being really honest about, the fact that it's a gene edited product and talking to consumers about, the difference between, what we're doing and what else is out on the market.
Cool. So I have another question from Randy. Can you speak on what's a little more of what's possible using Talon that's not possible with traditional GMO methods or with CRISPR?
I would say Talon and CRISPR are essentially the same in terms of their function in the sense that they both create or can induce edits in the genome. The major difference between Talon and CRISPR, there's kind of two big differences. Talon is a little bit larger than CRISPR, which means it's more precise. It's, if you think about the length and what it looks for in the genome, it's able to pretty much track to any gene anywhere in any genome. CRISPR has to have a specific sequence that it looks for, and if the gene that you're interested in has that sequence, it works wonderfully. If it doesn't have that sequence, you can't always target a CRISPR element to it. We don't have that same deficiency with Talon. Talon also seems to be really, really good when you're in dense regions of the genome, which tend to be harder for CRISPR to get into, that Talon can get into. But generally, they do similar types of things. So it's the ability that we have access to Talon. CRISPR's licensed through a different set of organizations. There's actually at least two organizations you have to get a license from in order to use CRISPR versus Talon, where you just need a license from us to use.
Okay, we have another question from Bruce Bennett. If Europe doesn't approve Talon and CRISPR, will that throw a wrench into production in the US?
It hasn't to date, because technically right now they don't have approval for gene-edited products in Europe. They're working through what that approval process should look like. But we currently maintain a identity preservation within the US. So making sure that the crops that we're producing stay here in the US and don't get out into jurisdictions they're not supposed to be in. But it definitely, obviously, if you have paths forward, which most of the countries, I think Japan's been the most recent one that has sort of spearheaded the gene editing adoption. More and more countries are seeing that gene editing is very different from GM and has huge value across sort of the ag technology world. So they're starting to move, even in Europe, they're starting to get some interesting movement towards approval. So we're expecting that to be an ever-changing or evolving system at this point.
I think we have time for one more question. And so sort of continuing on the theme with, regulatory environment, how do you navigate the regulatory and IP challenges in introducing modified hybrids in different jurisdictions that might not have the same approval process and rule of law concerning the reuse of these?
Yeah, so it's obviously dependent on where you're going to market and where you're going to grow, especially if it's a plant-based system, because where you can grow it and then where you can market the end products is really critical to know where your jurisdictions are. Technically, in the U.S., gene editing is a voluntary process, so we go through that process just to be transparent and make sure that everyone agrees with our safety assessment. And then depending on where we're planning to move with it, if it's in just North America, you'll have the US and then Canada, and then other jurisdictions across the globe like Japan, China, trying to think of some of the others we've gone to, but those tend to be the big areas. Japan's been one of the ones that's just opened up most recently, which is they are very much in favor of gene editing and have been putting out very clear regulations around how they are handled. So it's definitely something you have to keep an eye on.
Well, I guess, and then, what do you think this technology looks like, 10, 15 years out?
I think, gene editing itself is a super valuable tool in a toolbox of technologies that are available to the ag sector. When you think about breeding and advanced breeding techniques with markers, if you're going to be doing the GM route, if you're going to be doing, continuing to be, thinking about building these products, it really comes down to understanding how the tools work and then which tools you should apply to solve the problem that you're needing to supply. And I think it's been most interesting, if you look at the COVID, the last year we spent with COVID and the technologies around vaccine production, the fact that we're actually seeing great success with an mRNA-based vaccine, which we've never seen before, is really proof that these technologies, while maybe unknown to a lot of people, can become all of a sudden extraordinarily important in time of need. And having the access and being able to develop and continue to develop these technologies and understand them leads to these kinds of really great innovations. And so I think having access to these technologies gives us the ability to think about how to get creative as we progress. The population continues to grow. Acres that we grow that material on are continually, going away. They're going under either construction or we're losing acres through other means, whether it be climate change or other environmental factors that can restrict the growth of those crops. And so having these tools at our disposal really help us think about how to innovate and give us the ability to innovate and evolve as we see new problems that are sort of attacking our ability to meet the needs of the growing population.
Any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I think it's really exciting to see, especially in this forum, this summit, just the amount of ag technology that is coming to bear. And I encourage the folks here to be thinking about how all of these different technologies and companies can thrive and continue to grow. And the more of these events we can have and get the word out of the great things that we're all doing, I think the better for all of us and really for society as a whole. So really thank the organizers for putting this on.
Well, thank you so much again for coming.
No, thank you.